Hi, my name is Rabbi Pesach Kron. You're watching Taped with Rabbi Doug, and I hope you all are inspired by this great show.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is someone who I would say is probably one of 4 or 5 most famous Mohalim, as we say, circumcisers, rabbis in the country. Rabbi Howard Seif, welcome to the show. Fondly known as Seif the Knife. Rabbi Seif is in southern Florida, and he lived in Chicago for a number of years going to school. He has children here in Chicago, and you just did the bris, the Brit Milah of your own grandson today, didn't you?
I was blessed with that obligation, and it truly hit me with a spirit of confidence and yet hesitation in approaching my grandson.
Now, is this your first grandson you've done a bris for?
No.
It is not. How many grandsons do you have?
Oh, that's a tough question. My wife won't be happy if I don't have the answer right away. Let's see, from this son I have 1, from my daughter I have 2, and from my other son I have 2, and from my other son I have 3. So that's 3, 5, 7, 8 grandsons.
And you've done all 8?
No, I've done 6 out of 8.
6 out of the 8 you've done. Very nice, very nice. And tell me, how many granddaughters do you have?
I just had my, this is my 18th grandchild.
18.
So
10.
The rest are granddaughters.
10. So 18 grandchildren, Kanai. What a great bit of nachas and simcha for you to have so many wonderful grandchildren.
So what I set up my kids about that, because when they got married, I told my daughters-in-law and my daughter, remember I told you, it's quality of children, not quantity. And I knew they wouldn't listen to the old man, and it's quite a blessing.
So, thank God I've gotten to know you over the years, visiting Chicago and visiting your children here. I know you went to Hebrew Theological College for college. Where'd you go to high school?
I was in Miami Beach at the Mesivta High School in South Florida.
Oh, Mesivta High School in South Florida, very nice. And so you came here for college, and then you went on and did what as far as...
I majored, even though I was in the rabbinical program at Skokie, I also majored in accounting at Roosevelt University, so I'm a graduate of Roosevelt.
Very nice.
And I continued on in
Brisk
Rabbinical College.
And you got your smicha, your ordination from Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik.
Correct.
Ah, very nice, very nice. So you don't learn to be a Mohel from all these things, but as my viewers don't know, your father was a Mohel.
Correct.
And your great-grandfather or grandfather?
Correct.
Great-grandfather. So there is a tradition going through the generations of Mohalim in your family. Any of your sons take it up yet?
2 are very interested, and we'll see what happens as time goes on.
Now, a person who gets what we call Kabbalah, gets the a certification from another Mohel in being trained. You actually started your training officially right here in Chicago, didn't you?
Correct. With Rabbi Ben Sion Wells.
So I want to talk about Rabbi Ben Sion Wells. Rabbi Ben Sion Wells was my teacher, and in my growing up in the northwestern suburbs, he was the main teacher of the synagogue. So he was someone that I've known since I was a little boy, very close with my family. I spent Pesach in Florida with him before, over the years. His children, obviously, I know very well. 2 of his sons through the years, B'nai Kiva, Camp Moshava. One of them staying here as a rabbi. We were a rabbi on the same pulpit. In my old pulpit, he would come for the high holidays and come there. So we have a lot of connections. When I talked about that you were one of 3 or 4 of the most famous Mohalim in the United States, I want to go back and talk who those people are, because they're very important. One of them, of course, is Rabbi Pesach Kron on the East Coast. Rabbi Kron, maybe the most famous Mohel in the United States. And then beside you in Chicago, there is Noah Wolf, who I would say is probably one of the most well-known and famous Mohalim in the United States as well, Rabbi Leibovitz in Los Angeles.
Correct, I know him.
Also one of the most famous Mohalim in the United States, of course, Southern Florida, there's SEIF the Knife. You don't just locate yourself in Southern Florida for doing a bris, as I called you for friends of mine who lived in Northern Florida who were in college and working up in Gainesville. You went up to Gainesville to do the bris of their son. So how much traveling do you actually do as a mohel? And I'm sure, you know, usually when you find a mohel, it's usually in the bigger cities, and there are small Jewish communities and Jewish people who live in smaller communities because of business and things like that, that you must be traveling around to do a bris for their children as well.
Correct. I've been blessed to travel to some of the islands off of Florida, Central America. I know I was in Quito, Ecuador 3 times. I was in El Salvador as well a couple of times. Puerto Rico and the Bahamas, and as well as people fly me into the San Joaquin Valley, and it's a 2-hour drive from San Francisco, as well as Los Angeles and even New York.
Wow, you've been all over. So let me ask you a question. When you go to these other countries, is there a problem with certification, being a mohel and doing a surgery in these places? Do they ever ask you to register or anything like that before you do it?
That's a good question. They really don't. And one time I did it when I was in Quito. I did it in one of their hospitals there, and a lot of the pediatricians and some of the surgeons came to watch me as well. So for whatever reason, I don't remember, I was there and it was very interesting, and I entertained questions and I asked them questions, and we had a good time, and the baby did well.
So if you officiate a lot of weddings like I do, and you go to other cities and other states, there are places that ask you to register in their cities before you sign that marriage certificate as their license as being a legal wedding. But not as a mohel, huh?
No, correct. Also, it's interesting, if I travel within the 48 U.S. states, within within the hemisphere, I have no problem carrying my bag on board. There is a TSA policy. Clergymen get to carry their tools. I think the exception to that may be a shochet who's carrying his knives, his large knives. But other than that, even when I travel to Israel, I have to check in my baggage and make sure and pray that it gets there on time and with me.
So when you said you trained with Rabbi Ben Zion Well of blessed memory, who I said I was so close to, who else did you train with? Because I know he wasn't the only one.
So I spent time with Noah Wolf as well here.
Right here.
And what a blessing. I also, of course, my father did most of the training. And in my travels, I have a close friend who originally is from Denver, Colorado, Rabbi Yankee Feder. He was a rabbi in Los Angeles for a number of years, and we spent time together as well.
And how old were you when you got your Kabbalah, when you were actually able to do a bris on your own without supervision?
I'd say about 27.
About 27. And do you have a number? Do you have a number of how many bris you've done?
I'm asked that all the time. And I really say, and it's my motto, but it's true, quality, not quantity. And each bris gets me to the door of the next people. But every time you approach every baby or every family, that's the first baby for the rest of your life. So you have to, and if you want to average of 3 or 4 a week over 30 plus years, you can use that as an average. And I never count. Again, it's a blessing to be able to do this mission in life. And at the same time, I'm sort of cutting into your mission, because I was also one of the first hospice rabbis in South Florida as well, with Vitas. So that may be for another show.
Yeah,
but
very interesting,
interesting. And I've done many families where crossover from a bris to a funeral to a hospice situation. And really, it's you're treating people, maybe 80 if not 90% of Jews are unaffiliated.
True.
In America, probably throughout South Florida as well. So I'm like a circuit rabbi without portfolio.
Right, they consider you to be their rabbi because you're the only rabbi they have a relationship with.
And it's something, it's a real mitzvah, and it's somewhere I feel important to reach out to those who need me versus being in a synagogue or a structure where I'm exclusive to the membership. I did that route in Los Angeles over 35 years ago, and it was good for a number of years, but I felt there are a lot more people out there that needed me, and I wanted to serve a larger community.
I understand. Very interesting. So when you go around and do a bris and so on and so forth, do you ever get nervous still? Is it, you know, sometimes when you do something that you are an expert at and you've done it for years, even though it's a dangerous thing and you have to be exact and perfect at it, because there is danger, there is malpractice, there are all those things that go along with any type of surgery, and a bris goes along with that. Do you still get nervous, or are you really full of your confidence because you've been in the profession for so long?
You are full of confidence and experience, but at the same time, there's always a hesitation, because I want this baby to be as perfect as the mother wants the baby to be. And just like every parent feels their children are perfect, and they are when they're born, to them in most cases, thank God, but I feel you're giving more, and I look at myself today based on my history and my reputation, that I'm not just a Mohel going into home to do a circumcision, but I'm like a plastic surgeon, where it's not just a bris, it's not just a circumcision, it has to be perfect. So I feel that you have to do this from the heart, and with your experience, it works out that way. And occasionally when you have a challenge, not every baby's alike, you have to deliver a quality product.
Did you do any of your own children's bris?
Yes, my oldest son, I was trained ready to do him, and my father at the last minute pushed me out of the way and said, "You'll do the next one." So, but that was Grandpa's prerogative. And since he did me, he offered to do me again for free. So I had to yield to my dad.
Sure.
But numbers 2 and 3 I did. I have a brother-in-law, Rabbi Selmar in North Miami Beach. And I really wanted him to do my third son, but he came late. And of course, the show must go on. So I ended up doing him as well. And that's my son who's living in Chicago.
Very nice. Very nice.
So it's,
So I'm going to talk to our viewers for a minute. For those of them that are not familiar with bris milah, with ritual circumcision, as the Torah says in the story of Abraham, that you should circumcise your son when he is 8 days old. That doesn't mean count 8 days from his birth, but including the day of his birth. So if he was born on a Sunday, his bris is on a Sunday. Of course, health reasons always postpone a bris, because we never, if a baby has jaundice or some other illness, we never do the bris while the baby is not in 100% health. And of course, if a premature baby, that would also be the case until the baby is 100% healthy. Is it you that makes those decisions, or is it you and the doctor together?
technically it should be me and the doctor, but in this day and age, I really yield to the pediatricians or the neonatologists. They're on top of the situation. I feel I want to be guided by them because each one has their own requirements. No two are alike. For example, even with my grandson here, the doctor was not sure the first 2 or 3 days. The jaundice was not really high, but not too low. And he felt he was hesitating, and I said, fine. In South Florida, it would have been a go from the start, dealing with most of the pediatricians that I know. But again, I have to respect the medical profession, and I feel it's important to yield to them in these type of decisions.
In Soviet Russia, where it was illegal at the time to circumcise Jewish children, at the time of Glasnost and Gorbachev and freedom of religion setting in slowly, a lot of adult children and adults themselves decided that they were denied the opportunity to follow their Jewish tradition and have a bris milah, and they wanted to be circumcised as adults. Have you ever done any adults that weren't circumcised as children?
Yes,
And it's done in the hospital usually,
yeah,
right?
mostly because they're older.
Visa.
And I work with an Orthodox urologist who together we would circumcise them, and he would, of course, I would need him because he would do a lot of the stitching and take care of the, and if there's any bleeding, because adults bleed, kids bleed very little, and it's usually controlled, babies, but the adults, they're much older, and you have to ensure a perfection in what you do, and not to cause any harm, but to help heal.
Okay, so I'd love to see some of your instruments, if you wouldn't mind showing us a little bit about what you do when you do a bris, because it's so interesting, and it is so important that people should understand that you and any other mohel must be 100% sterile when you do a bris because of the dangers of infection. Everything is sterilized, everything is freshly sterilized from beginning to end.
Correct.
And clean. So I just want to make that clear that a bris, whether it's done by a mohel or done by a doctor in a hospital to a non-Jewish baby or something like that, or for somebody who doesn't have the Jewish tradition and doesn't know, the sterile and the safety factors are always held to the highest.
100%. And just like in my training with hospice, when we had to deal with babies when AIDS first came on, appeared on the scene and affected babies as well as adults, so too we were trained as well to ensure to the success and prevention of infection for ourselves as well as for others. So you notice the first thing that popped up was a pair of gloves. So I always wear gloves because that's important to prevent anything.
And wash your hands with soap and water and everything before that.
Of course, more than once. And then what I do, other mohel have a knife, a pure knife. I use a scalpel blade, so I use a sterile blade, and when I travel, I'll just add a sterile blade onto here. So this allows me to take my instruments on board. Others have a small knife that is used for the bris. This is known as a shield, and there are various shapes, sizes, and forms. The shield is where you slide the foreskin in, and then you cut above the shield, so it protects the babies, behind the baby, so that you're protecting the baby. And then you will have a little bleeding, but then when you remove the shield, you pull the skin down and put a little bandage wrapping, and the babies do fine.
Now tell me, there's an instrument that some non-Orthodox doctors use, and when they do circumcisions, which aren't kosher for a bris. And what does that instrument do different from the shield that makes it not allowable?
There are a couple types. One is like a bell clamp. The other one is similar to these, except on the very bottom, was invented by a rabbi, there's a lock, so you could put the foreskin in the area, and then there's a little lock that you lock it, you make the cut, and you remove the lock. Just to let you know, it's not accepted today, but going back in the 60s and 70s, there were many Orthodox mohels that did use them, but today it's accepted to go with this method. Other instruments is a hemostat, which is a mosquito clamp which holds the skin together before you cut. Of course, you need a sterile pair of scissors just to cut your gauze pads and help if there's any other reason for it. You initially begin with a probe, which is usually
separates the foreskin.
Right. There's an outer foreskin that you and I see. There's an inner foreskin called the mucosa membrane, which is similar to the cuticle of your nail.
Does that get cut also?
Yes, yeah. And the old tradition was to cut the outer foreskin first, where they had these instruments, pull up and cut, and then they would peel back that inner foreskin, that mucosa membrane. They would peel it back. Today, if you use the probe, you can release all the adhesions, and everything comes off in one shot. There are Orthodox or Hasidic mohels that want to do it the old-fashioned way, I should say old-fashioned, but their traditional way, which is removing the outer foreskin and then somewhat peeling back a little bit of the mucosa membrane. So that was a tradition that they had coming from their parents and grandparents.
Interesting. And then there's the tradition of mitzitza, of drawing out the blood, just a few drops of blood, but drawing out blood. And this is done actually with the mouth. Now I know that most mohelim today use a glass tube with a cotton in it to prevent infection and again for safety purposes. When you're learning to be a mohel, is it a scary thing to learn mitzitza, the drawing of the blood?
And it does bring you some hesitation. When you talk about Hasidim, it doesn't, because this is, there I say, on a different plane, different level, and this is part of their tradition, so they do it without thinking twice. If I was born into a Hasidic family, but being in a more modern American Orthodox family, and one who's trained medically, so I just want to be sure you're not to do harm, you're to protect the baby, so you want to keep a high standard. So again, I've heard from different mohelim based on famous rabbis going into Yerushalayim way back from the 40s to the 80s, that they asked that question, is the only way doing it with the mouth? And they said there are really three ways. One way is with a sterile tube, as you said, putting either a sterile gauze or a sterile piece of cotton in, so it's symbolic, or you do draw blood. technically it's with your mouth, but you're protecting the area of the circumcision so there's no infection. And there's also one called Metzitza Biyadayim. You take a sterile gauze and you just touch the area and draw blood. And that may be used in a case when, if parents have a certain disease or a certain infection, and there may be, it's best not to use even the area, the suction cup or whatever you're going to use. So therefore, it's an extra stage of protection, but it is considered a kosher sucking. I've seen many very Orthodox rabbis doing it that way for their reasons, and I've seen many on the liberal side as well. So there is a basis for it, based in Judaism and Halacha, but it's not with the worldwide accepted practice, as is using a sterile tube to draw blood or going another way.
What happens when, this is a question I've always had, and I've never asked the Mohel this, but I'm interested. When you find out that a baby's blood isn't coagulating and you need to do a bris, what happens? How is the bris? Are they exempt from a bris? Is there something that we do different? How does it work? And I've always wanted to ask that question.
Really, you have to be guided by a medical physicians, and that would probably take place in a hospital if it would be done. But I think it's out of the purview of a Mohel today to do a bris as that, because if it's hemophilia, it could be a serious issue. I had one case of hemophilia that I was not aware of many years ago, and the mother knew, I found out the mother knew that her grandmother or great-grandmother there was an issue in the family, but she did not relay it to me. But thank God, the baby healed slow, there was no bleeding. And one reason why we found out about it was he was at the doctor 2 or 3 weeks later, and the belly button came off, and the doctor couldn't stop the bleeding of the belly button. So they went to the hospital and they gave him certain drugs that allowed the coagulants, and he was fine, the mother told me. And that's why, even though I did a good bris, but it was healed very slowly, she felt uneasy about it. When she called, I said, I'll come and see you, but she said, no, we're going to the doctor first, so I'll come and see you after your appointment with the pediatrician.
Wow.
So in timing and the blessing of God, it worked out. But there are questions you have to ask, and family of medical history, it's very important, and hopefully you get the proper answers.
Wow. So there's two sides of everything to ask about a bris, because I have so many questions. So another question that people ask, do you get tips? No, no, seriously, the skin, is the skin buried? Because we know if someone has an amputation, that amputation is supposed to be buried. Do the foreskins that the Mohel takes, what happens to them? Do they get buried? Do they get
they're also supposed to be buried. I will take them, put them in a gauze package. Occasionally, families ask me to give them, they want to do the burial, that's fine. There's no blessings or anything, you just bury it in the ground. Sometimes if I didn't get a chance and I have a few, sometimes after a funeral, at the very end of the covering, I'll ask the family, sometimes they may want, I said, these are mitzvahs I did, good deeds I did in Judaism, do you want them to be buried on the very top once he's completely covered? If not, I will handle it. And some are very blessed or feel good that yes, he was a good man, she was a good wife, and I appreciate the offering. Yes, please bury from the brises, so at least they don't take anything with them in this world to the next life, but let them be buried with blessings, as some are buried with other objects for that.
So I want to go to another subject. This is an important subject also, I think, and people really don't know about it. If someone happens to be circumcised in a hospital when they're 2 days old, which is often a practice, 2-3 days old, they're circumcised by a doctor, or maybe they had a circumcision and it wasn't a Mohel on the 8th day, maybe some doctor did it, and it wasn't a proper Mohel, and these people become more religious or more knowledgeable about Jewish tradition, say, oh, I didn't have a proper bris, what do I do now? There's something called hatafas dam or hatafat dam. Hatafas dam is taking a drop of blood, per se, from the area of the bris, and the blessings that are said at that time, it makes that bris that didn't happen become kosher because the child's already circumcised. Do you do hatafas dam? Have you done it many times? Have you done it for adult converts, males who already were circumcised but had to have a hatafas dam? Has that come about in your career?
Quite a few times. I'm a member of the Young Israel in Hollywood, Florida, Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale, and our rabbi, Rabbi Davis, did many conversions in his prime. He represented Chabad rabbis and others, and many times I was called in to do for the men, and even for some boys, if they didn't have a proper bris initially, what we call TAPED. And basically, we want to keep it very simple and proper. So basically, it's the skin that healed just behind the area there where they had the initial cut. You take a sterile pin. I usually use a small diabetic needle and remove just a little speck of blood in the name of circumcision.
So I've been there. There's usually, if it's for conversion, there's usually a Beit Din there.
Correct.
When it takes place, and I wasn't there. The Mohel goes alone usually and then shows the blood to the Beit Din or however it is. But I did see what he used. He used one of those things that we used in high school for blood tests.
Right, exactly.
It was a little pointy,
Yes.
I don't know what those are.
Lancet.
Lancet.
And
He used
basically,
that
yes.
to do it.
Yeah, because they're sterile, you use one time to dispose of them. And that's what a diabetic does, usually to take blood for when he has to check his blood. So it's easy, it's simple. There are others who do other methods, which I won't get into now, which are just not logical, don't make sense, because you only need a small little speck of blood. You don't need.
Now I've heard from a Mohel in Israel who I was eating by on Pesach when I was in yeshiva. This is a long time ago, obviously. But I've also never asked this question. He said there are some traditions where they take from 3 different places or 2 different places blood. What is that tradition and what is that based on? I've always wondered that, and I have you here to ask now.
Okay. There are Sephardic or Taimani customs that want to do it that way because they feel, since you didn't have the actual bris, they think that because the blood comes from different parts of the organ area there. But they do that. You're the first to ask me this question. And I've heard of it, but we don't do it that way. No rabbis no Beit Din has ever requested me to do it that way. And it's not the accepted practice today, although, as you say, I've heard it being done, but not quite like that, but at the same time.
Before we went on the air, you told me a great story. I wonder if you'd share that with my viewers.
One cute story, if we have the time. My wife and I were driving to a bris about maybe 6-7 years ago in a certain area. And back then, this is before GPS, even if it was on, we weren't paying attention to the GPS. And we see a house with cars on the block that we're approaching. That must be it. So we walk in, I have my bris bag or my bris kit with me. Hi, how are you? I'm Howard Seif, Rabbi Seif. Nice to meet you. Oh, goody, I'm glad you're here. So where's the baby? They said, what baby? This is a wedding celebration for newlyweds. What we would call Sheva Brachot. And I said, oh, I guess I'm in the wrong house. And they said, we know you did the bris for this one or for this one. They said, we'll call you in 9 months, but let the kids enjoy their time together. And sure enough, 2 blocks later was another crowd, a bunch of cars, and of course, it was so good, yeah, the right house.
Very cute. Well, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. Such a pleasure always to see you. Our viewers should only know how humorous you are. You have a great sense of humor, and you're so personable, and I'm sure that's why so many people look to you as their rabbi once they meet you who are not affiliated, because you have that warm personality. Rabbi Howard Seif, Seif the Knife, from Southern Florida. I want to thank all of you for being with us. Remember, you can check out our website, www.tvrabbi.com. You can also see former shows on the web. If you want to email Rabbi Seif or email me, you can send that to info@tvrabbi.com. I'll forward it to him, and I know he'll get back to you personally. Thanks again for being with us, and thank you for being with us. Hope to see you next time right here on Tape with Rabbi Doug. Shalom, everyone.
This has been a Taped with Rabbi Doug production.